All right, students, we're going to pick up today with greatest common factor, least common multiple, and equivalent fractions, but with variables. So the first problem, you have 2x, 6x squared, and 12x squared. Now I'm looking for the greatest common factor for all three of them. So if I look at the constant first, or it's actually the coefficient, the number attached to the variable, what do they all have in common? Well, they all have a 2 in common. Now look at the variable. What all do they have in common? They have at least one x in common. So now I'm going to divide out. 2x divided by 2x is just 1. 6 divided by 2 is 3. I have 2 x's here. I've taken 1 out. How many do I have left? Just 1 x. 12 divided by 2 is 6. And if there were 2 x's and I took 1 out, how many do I have left? I have 1 left. Now, what is my greatest common factor? It would be this. The greatest common factor would be 2x. That's all that they had in common. They only had a 2 in common as far as the number, a coefficient, and they only had 1 x in common. Now, let's do another one. Let's say I had 20x squared and 36x. Once again, what do they both have in common? As far as the coefficient, they're both even. If I look at them, I can see that 4 would go into both of them. How many x's do they both share? Just 1. Now divide out. 20 divided by 4 is 5. You had 2 x's. One was pulled out. You got 1 left. 36 divided by 4 is 9. 1 x, and we took it out, so we don't have any more x's left. So what was my greatest common factor? My greatest common factor is 4x. All right, we're going to do 2 more. 32m squared, 6x squared, and 2y. Once again, start with the number. What does 32, 6, and 2 all have in common? Well, it can only be 2 because that's my highest number. Now, this is an m, that's the x, and that's a y. So that means they have no variable in common. So 32, that would be 16. The m's come down. 6 divided by 2 is 3. The x's come down. And 2 divided by 2 is 1. 1 times y is just y. My greatest common factor is just 2. That's the only thing that they had in common. The last one that we are going to do is just variables. X squared, y, comma, x to the 4th power, y, and x, y to the 2nd. Remember, I just put my comma in between the terms. This is one whole, that's one, and so on. So I don't want to put a comma in between those that are being multiplied. So this was x squared, y, the comma just goes there. Now, what do they have in common? They each have at least 1x, because this only has 1 in common. Do they both have a y? Well, this has 1, 1, and 2, so they only have 1 y in common. So now, 2 x's take away 1, I have 1 left. A y take away y leaves nothing, just 1. So 1 times x is just x. 4 take away 1 is 3. The y's are gone. The x cancel each other out. And y, you have 2 of them, take away 1 is just a y. The greatest common factor is just xy. So that covers greatest common factor with variables. Now, the next thing we're going to cover is going to be least common multiples with variables. Now, remember, we did the least common multiples before. Now, the least common multiple is actually the same thing as my least common denominator. So if I had 9xy squared and 15 x to the second y. I'm going to do the same exact thing that I just did finding the greatest common factor, except this time I'm going to do the least common multiple. Remember, that's the big L afterwards. So what number does 9 and 15 have in common? They both have a 3. Do these both have an x in common? Yes, they have one. What about a y? Yes, they just have one y in common. Now, 9 divided by 3 is 3. Those x's are gone. 2 y's take away 1 y, leaves 1 left. 15 divided by 3 is 5. 2 x's take away 1, leaves me 1 x, and the y take away y. They're gone. Now, my least common multiple, remember, is the big L outside. So 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 5 is 45. I have 1x here, 1x there for x to the second. 1y here, 1y here for y to the second. So if you just noticed on the variable, it's the highest variable that I have for each one in the problem. Let's do another one. Let's say I had 5x squared, 16x to the third. Now, hopefully you guys are thinking to yourself, okay, what am I going to pull out of here? If I look at my numbers, the coefficients, 5 and 16 don't have anything in common except 1. So I'm going to move to my variables. I have 2 x's here and 3 here. So what do they both have in common? There's 2 of them. Now divide out. There's 5 is just going to come down. 2 x's cancel. The 16, 3 x's, and I've got 2 here, so I only have 1 left. Now my least common multiple, once again, is the L. 5 times 16 is what? 80. I have 2 x's and another x, x to the third. And if you notice, once again, that was the highest powered variable up there. Okay, we're going to wrap this up with just 2 more. The next is 6m to the second, 10m to the third. So hopefully you guys are thinking to yourself, what does 6 and 10 have in common? The only thing I can think of is they're both even, so that means they must have at least a 2. Now, my m's, my variables, what do they both have in common? Well, this has 2, that has 3, so they both have 2 in common. Divide out. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 2m's, 2m's. That would leave you with 1, so it's gone. Or m divided by m to the second divided by m to the second is 1. So 1 times 3, we just leave it. That's why I always say they're canceled out. 10 divided by 2 is 5. You have 3 m's. You take away 2. That leaves you with just 1 m. Now, your least common multiple is 2 times 3, which is 6, times 5 is 30. 2 m's and 1 m is m to the third. Once again, hopefully you notice that is the highest powered variable. That's always going to be your least common multiple. If I was to ask you a question about what is the greatest common factor, hopefully you could tell me that the greatest common factor was just 2m squared. So hopefully we're thinking about that in the back of our minds as we're doing these. And the last one, I'm just going to do variables on this one. Let's say you had r to the second, then you had 5rtx. There is a coefficient in there. But if I look at these, the number that's in front of this r to the second is just 1. So is there a greatest common factor other than 1? No, there's not. So I'm just going to do the variables. Well, this only has an r, and that has an r, so that's the only thing they have in common. If I divide it out now, 2 here, take away 1, that leaves me with just 1. my 5. The r's cancel. There is no t and there is no x. So now, what is my least common multiple? Just the 5. R and R is r to the second. There's a t and there is an x. So if you notice, it's the highest powered variable and all the other ones go with it. Hopefully, guys, you can realize if you're pulling out of this, what would be my greatest common factor? It would just be r. Now we're going to go to our last thing, which is equivalent fractions or simplest form. Now, what we've been doing, you should have been able to pull all of that out if you looked at some of those past problems. So once I'm done, hopefully you'll look at your problems that we just did and say, hey, what if this was a fraction? What would simplest form be? What's the greatest common factor? Look at the ones that we did just the greatest common factor on and figure out what's the least common multiple. All right. Let's wrap this up with 3 of these. Let's say your fraction was 4m n to the third divided by 10n to the second. Now, once again, you're going to use the upside down division method. So this 4m n to the third is all 1. Put your comma. 10n to the second. Now you're looking for, once again, pull out your greatest common factor. What does 4 and 10 have in common? They both have a 2 in common. There's only an m here, not here, so that's not in common. Well, 2 n's are in common. Now divide out. 4 divided by 2 is 2. M, 3 n's take away 2 is 1. 10 divided by 2 is 5. Both n's are gone. So if you were wanting to pull out the greatest common factor, you know it would be 2n squared. If you were wanting to find the least common multiple, it would be 2 times 2, which is 4, times 5 is 20. You've got m n to the third, because there's an m and those. Now, if I'm wanting simplest form, well, guys, it's just this. Put it back in fraction form. That 4 was on top, so that means the 2mn is on top, all over 5. And there is your simplest form. Let's do 5x to the second, y to the second, over 40xy. Once again, I'm going to set it up using my upside down division. That's 5x squared, y squared. My second one is 40xy. I'm going to pull out my greatest common factor again. What do they both have in common? I know they're both divisible by 5 because they end with a 5. This has 2 x's and just 1, so only 1's in common. 2 y's and just 1, so only 1 y is common. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 2 x's take away 1 leaves me an x. 2 y's take away 1 leaves me a y. 40 divided by 5 is 8. X cancel, y's cancel. Now, let me kind of clean that up a little bit. If I was wanting to know my greatest common factor, so I'm just kind of reviewing back over this with you, my greatest common factor would be 5xy. If I wanted to know what my least common multiple is, 5 times 8 is 40. 2 x's. And I think I'm missing something somewhere. Those x, y's carry. No, I'm sorry. 2 x's, 1 here and 1 here, and 2 y's right there. Now, my simplest form is going to be what's left over. That's xy over, remember that goes with the 5, which is up top in the numerator, over 8. So this upside down division is going to get you everything you need. The last problem, let's say 6m to the second, x to the second, y to the fourth, all over 12mx. So once again, set up your upside down division. That's 1, so that's the numerator, so I'm going to put the comma, 12mx. Now let's divide out. What does 6 and 12 have in common? I know right away that they both have 6. If you didn't know, you could say 2 and walk down each step, but right away you know that they have 6 in common. This has 2 m's, that just has 1, so it's only going to be 1 m. 2 x's and only 1, so just the x. Now, this has no y, so they have no y in common. Divide out. The 6's are gone, 2 m's with 1, 2 x's, and take away 1 is an x left. And there's no y, so all y to the fourth. 12 divided by 6 is 2. M is gone, x and x is gone. So now if I was wanting to know my greatest common factor, my least common multiple, and my simplest form. Once again, the greatest common factor is what did you pull out? I pulled out 6mx. My least common multiple is everything that is out here, the big L. So 6 times 2 is 12. I have an m here and an m here, so for 2 m's. I have an x here and an x here, which is 2 x's, and I have y to the fourth. So guys, if you notice, once again, it's the highest powered variable. There's an m squared, x squared, and y to the fourth. That should be in your least common multiple because it's also your least common denominator. Now, simplest form is just what we brought it down to. So line it up once again because that's my numerator and denominator. So my numerator would be mxy to the fourth all over, I'm going to put it that way so it don't look like a z, all over 2. So once again, using upside down division, you can find the greatest common factor, least common multiple, simplest form, and remember, simplest form is also called, that's an equivalent fraction to this. All right, that ends our lesson.